This program is brought to you by Teachers College, Columbia University. Please visit us online at itunes.tc.columbia.edu.
I do want to talk about shifting gender effects, and I think this actually goes nicely with some of the topics that have been brought up already in this sort of dynamic between the idea of I think you used the logic of inclusiveness, which I think is a good way to put it, and then this dynamic between the sort of the global-local tension that's going on. So some interesting ways to think about it. I want to cover 4 areas, if I can, in 5 minutes, looking at some of the literature on comparative social stratification and incorporation of women, looking briefly at an empirical case of gender and math, and then some perspectives on gender inequality, if there's time left. So I don't think there's any doubt that gender has had a huge influence on education-related outcomes. We see this throughout the comparative social stratification literature. I've listed in microscopic type here some of the references that we can check, but there's quite a bit out there, so that we don't really have any question about whether or not gender is having an impact on education-related outcomes. The idea of shifting gender effects, however, comes from an older theme of stratification that says that future opportunity structures somehow affect education-related expectations and behaviors in the present. So looking forward will affect what happens now. And there's a lot of empirical evidence of this in all of the 3 sort of typical areas that we think about: race, class, and gender. And we've seen some studies done that are actually quite good at looking at how there is this sort of future opportunity, current performance, or current expectation relationship. But there are some issues that we thought it was useful to extend a little bit with this argument. One is, how do we extend this opportunity structure argument to fit within a larger scale and longer term incorporation of women into modern nation states? And I'll talk about what I mean by that in a minute. In fact, we have Christine here. I'm going to cite you in a second. And then how institutionalized mass schooling has facilitated the process. So I want to think about those 2 things. I'm going to talk about some underlying concepts here. One of the underlying concepts is that gender stratification of opportunity structures don't remain stationary. Right? Opportunity structure is something that shifts over time. It shifts globally, and yes, I will argue that it often shifts towards more egalitarian standards, although I'd agree that it isn't always implemented that way. One of the underlying ideas is related to our good friend human capital. The idea that the incorporation of women as productive citizens is in the national economic interest. So, of course, every rational nation state and policymakers in that nation state would foster the human capital development of girls and women, or at least the rhetoric of that. Another underlying idea with the incorporation of women has to do with social justice, and this is the egalitarian ideology part. Right? The idea that these egalitarian ideologies, the idea that we're going to expect that we should, of course, have gender equality, even if we aren't actually doing it, is because it's built on this establishment of progress and justice as national goals, that women have been incorporated as voting citizens or other sort of active members of whatever formal society we have set up. The rise of women's issues in national and international organizations and agendas, the fact that there actually is a world conference that addresses this sort of thing, these are important factors to consider when we talk about that. Some examples, right? We have the UNICEF campaign called Go Girls. A very important campaign, I believe, talks about how important self-esteem and empowerment is for girls and women, all the political, cultural, social, and economic benefits that are not only going to accrue to the individual girl or woman, but to the whole community if we just educate girls and women. We also have an interesting example from our friend around the world, Saudi Arabia. Marianne, you might recognize this. This is actually in that chapter I did for you. This is pulled off King Fahd bin Abdulaziz's website a couple of years ago. It's looking at enrollment rates for boys versus girls, and the point of the chart is really to show that there's increasing parity in enrollment between boys and girls. Okay, what I find more interesting is the text from the website. Right? From the start, Prince Fahd recognized the importance of providing educational opportunities to girls as well as boys, to which those of you who are familiar with Saudi Arabia might say, really? That's a good question. It happens to be one of the only systems that is gender segregated to the degree it is. Right? Boys and girls in different schools with different teachers, different parts of the ministry addressing each of those. It's very interesting that they would find it necessary to have this idea that equal educational opportunities for the sexes is an important element of the Saudi Arabian educational system and tie it into the culture and religion. I think that's important to consider. Why would they say that? What's driving that? Why would they have this sort of a representation? And of course we have, I'm sure everybody's familiar with Education for All. Out of the 6 EFA goals, half of them mention girls or women, and number 5 is completely dedicated to achieving gender equality. Now that's a huge deal, right? That we have, I'm just giving you a couple of examples. These global and national agendas sort of pushing towards egalitarian standards, even though we know, come on, we know it doesn't happen all the time. We know there isn't complete equality everywhere. So why does this happen, and how is that important? All right, I'm going to skip over that in the interest of time. All right, the empirical situation is complicated. What a shock. There is evidence of historical decline in inequality, and I'm going to show you some of that with our data. But there's also evidence of persistent inequality remaining cross-nationally. A study that was done on higher education by Charles and Bradley in 2002 showed a related example in higher ed, right? There were historical trends towards gender equality in enrollment in higher ed, but there were persistent cross-national variations in gender inequality in earned degrees, so that men and women may both be going to college or university, but they're not studying the same thing, or if even sometimes when they're studying the same subject, it may not actually have the same content. That's interesting. Well, if we look at gender and mathematics, now we're talking about, I'm going to talk specifically about 8th grade equivalent and 12th grade equivalent, we see sort of the same thing. There's evidence of an overall decline in the percent of countries with significant male advantage gender differences in math achievement, but there are persistent cross-national differences in the degree to which gender associates with achievement. I'm going to show you a scary table, but I'll explain it. All right, I don't expect you to be able to read all this, that's why I've color-coded. This is just a chart showing for each of the IEA mathematics studies, starting with FIMS in 1964, ending with TIMS in 2003, the actual national sex differences in math score. And then I've grouped countries into 3 different sections. On the bottom we have countries where boys outperform girls. On the top we have countries where girls outperform boys. And then of course in the middle we have countries with no significant gender difference. And if you were to count up the countries, and I know that there's a lot of variation in which countries are in from year to year, but if you were to look at the percent of countries in each of these IEA studies that have either no significant gender difference or where girls are outperforming boys, we actually see a shift towards more equality in math achievement in gender. But let's just look, we're in the US, so I picked the US, right? If we look at the United States, there's quite a bit of variation where it falls, of course, in the rankings from study to study. But if you'll notice, even in 2003, the US at the 8th grade level shifted into the category where boys were performing significantly higher than girls, which is different from all the previous studies. That's interesting. So we have a lot of variation going on, not only with the same countries, but if you look, and I would choose to look at 2003, we've got 9 countries, superior performance of girls, 9 superior performance of boys, a big group where there's equal performance. Variation exists, right? There's a lot of it right there. So, a couple of hypotheses we wanted to test. Since we have this idea that there is a historical decline in gender differences in math achievement, but we also have persistent inequality or persistent variation in these gender differences, how do we link this back to this future opportunity current performance idea? Well, one hypothesis we have is that cross-national variation in gender stratification in future opportunity structures is going to influence gender differences in math achievement at school. In other words, if in one country girls are reading textbooks and they see a lot of women as scientists and engineers and doctors presented in their textbooks, they're going to see that as a possible future opportunity for them, and they will adjust their behavior or their achievement or whatever in math and science subjects accordingly. In other countries where they see the opposite, they won't. All right? Just gave you that. Second hypothesis, we think that this future opportunity current performance relationship would be more evident among segments of the opportunity structure that are more gender stratified. That's complicated, so let me just briefly explain. So for example, we would think that if we're looking at math and science, higher education enrollment specifically, right, that would have more of an impact on this future opportunity current performance than just enrollment in higher ed in general. Because math and science higher education has traditionally been sort of a boys' club. Some of the data sources we use. We're actually using TIMSS 1995. I know that's not the latest version, and I'll tell you why we're using TIMSS 1995. It is the only one of these cross-national studies from the IEA that has the final year of secondary school, and we think that's important. It also is the only one that has a general versus an advanced math group, and that's also important when we're looking at stratification of gender opportunities. We look at 8th grade math achievement and 12th grade math achievement, or final year of secondary school. We also supplemented that with data from the OECD, NCS, and World Bank to give us some gender stratification indicators, which I'm going to briefly mention on the national level measures. Women's status in higher ed was measured with enrollment in higher ed overall and science and engineering specifically. Women's status in the labor force has to do with the percent of women who are in the labor force compared to men. Women's status in government has to do with the percentage of women in ministerial positions. Women's status in family policy has to do with abortion availability. And then we also looked at the representation of female students in 12th grade advanced math, which is, if we have time, I'll talk about that. It's an interesting part. For those of you who are math geeks, what we actually did was an HLM, a hierarchical linear model, and we looked at these gender stratification indicators on the slope. In other words, the relationship between someone being female and achievement. So we're actually looking at how these gender stratification indicators actually affect that relationship between gender and achievement, not just one or the other. I should mention, all of the models that we ran showed that being female lowers students' math scores relative to males after we control for all the other student level factors. Here's a big indicator that indicates persistent gender inequality in achievement. But that relationship itself is actually what we're testing with these gender stratification indicators. Yikes. All right. So among 8th graders, we found that there are basically two groups here: higher ed and labor markets, the human capital argument, government and family policies, social justice argument. Among 8th graders, human capital, gender stratification indicators actually lessen the effect of gender on achievement. The social justice ones, no effect. If we looked at 12th graders, we see a little more craziness. Women's status in higher education lessens the effect of gender on achievement overall. That's for enrollment in higher ed in general. But increases the effect of gender on achievement when we look specifically at science and engineering higher ed. In other words, we see that when girls are not seeing themselves or not seeing adult women in science and engineering higher ed, or that sort of idea, that's the idea behind this, that they tend to do worse in math. All right? We see no effect from the labor market, increased effect from government status, and lessening effect of family policy. I'm going to actually skip over that one, although it's a really interesting one. If we just looked at the outcomes for the two hypotheses specifically, this future opportunity current performance, we actually do see some support for it, more among the 8th grade population than the 12th graders, simply because the 12th graders it was a little more complicated and mixed, and with the 8th graders we had that really strong, the human capital gender stratification indicators did lessen the gender achievement relationship, whereas social justice did not. If we look at the second one, highly stratified future opportunities will affect the current performance of students. It's actually mixed. We see support among already stratified students. So in the 12th grade advanced math groups, we actually saw that the science and engineering higher ed enrollments of women lessened the gender effect, but increased the gender effect in the general math population. So if the students were already sort of stratified in their current schooling situation, they tended to respond in a way that lowered the effect of gender on math achievement. In other words, they did better. Overall, right on time. Overall, the trend of gender equity of opportunity structures does lessen. Oh, see, my phone's even telling me I'm done. Okay, got it. Does lessen the persistent effect of a student's gender on their math performance. But it's complicated, right? I mean, we can't just stop there and say, ta-da, that's all there is. There's a lot more that's going on in there. And in the paper, we try to dive into that a little more deeply. And certainly, it's ripe for future study. So, thank you.
The preceding program was brought to you by Teachers College, Columbia University. Please visit us online at itunes.tc.columbia.edu.